Michelangelo's art reminds us of the power of imperfection. His unfinished sculptures, rough and raw, speak of a deeper truth that life itself is incomplete, always evolving, and that beauty can be found in the journey, not just the destination. Tonight, as you prepare to unwind and rest, let go of the stresses of the day and allow your mind to drift into the peaceful stillness of the night. Here, in the quiet, we'll explore the legacy of Michelangelo, a man whose hands shaped not only marble but the very soul of Renaissance art. His sculptures, like the Rondinini Pietà, remind us that we, too, are works in progress, ever-changing, growing, and striving for something greater. As you lie back, feel the tension leave your body. Breathe deeply, let your muscles relax, and allow yourself to melt into the moment. Picture Michelangelo chiseling away at a massive block of stone, not knowing how the final form would appear, but trusting that within the stone lay something extraordinary, waiting to be revealed. Just as Michelangelo chipped away at the marble to uncover the figures within, we, too, chip away at our own lives, uncovering deeper truths about ourselves as we go. This moment is your chance to let go of the need for perfection, to embrace the idea that life is a journey filled with unfinished moments, and that's where the beauty lies. You are here, exactly where you need to be. The whispers of Michelangelo's story will guide you through the realms of art, faith, and inspiration, reminding you that even in our imperfection, there is grace, there is meaning. So, take another deep breath, let go of any lingering thoughts, and allow the whispers of history to carry you into the calm of the night. And before you drift off into a peaceful sleep, don't forget to follow Whisper Tales for more journeys into the lives of history's greatest creators. Here, we explore art, philosophy, and stories that inspire us to look beyond the surface, to seek the divine in the everyday. Close your eyes, relax, and let Michelangelo's legacy fill your dreams tonight. Sleep well, knowing that your journey, like his art, is a masterpiece in progress. Good night. Once upon a time, in the rolling hills of Tuscany, a small boy was born beneath the gentle gaze of the Florentine sun. His name was Michelangelo di Lodovico Buonarroti Simoni, but the world would come to know him simply as Michelangelo, the divine sculptor, the master painter, the architect whose hands would carve the soul of the Renaissance into the marble of history. The year was 1475, and though the world did not know it yet, this boy's arrival would change the course of art, faith, and humanity forever. His father, a stern but hopeful man, held the newborn Michelangelo in his arms, perhaps unaware of the greatness this child would one day carry. The infant would grow into a man whose hands would create visions so divine, so powerful, that they would seem to capture the very essence of life itself. Michelangelo's childhood was filled with the earthy scents of Tuscany, sun-kissed olives, the dry sweetness of cypress trees, and the distant hum of workers tending to the land. Yet, from a young age, Michelangelo's eyes were not fixed on the simple beauty of his surroundings, but on something grander, something far beyond the hills that cradled his home. The world he dreamed of was a world of creation, of chisels and stone, of brushes dipped in paint as thick as dreams. His heart longed to transform the very fabric of reality into something more, into beauty itself. As a boy, Michelangelo would wander through the bustling streets of Florence, where art and culture thrived like wildflowers in the fertile soil of the Renaissance. Here, great minds like Leonardo da Vinci and Botticelli walked the cobblestone streets, their presence casting long shadows of inspiration over the city. Florence was alive with the sound of hammer on marble, the whispered musings of poets and scholars, the fervor of a city blooming with human genius. And Michelangelo, still so young, felt this energy deep in his bones. Yet even then, amidst the splendor of Florence, Michelangelo felt a quiet pull, a calling that stirred in his chest like a distant drumbeat. It was a call to creation, to carve life out of stone, to capture the divine essence of humanity within the rough, cold surfaces of marble. He watched as the masters before him created beauty from chaos, and his heart ached to do the same. At 13, Michelangelo's talent became impossible to ignore. His hands, so young yet so precise, seemed to possess an ancient wisdom, an ability to bring forth life from the most unyielding of materials. His father, recognizing the spark within his son, allowed him to apprentice under the great Domenico Ghirlandaio, a master painter of Florence. Under Ghirlandaio's guidance, Michelangelo learned the delicate craft of fresco, the meticulous blending of pigments on wet plaster. Yet even as his brushstrokes became more fluid, more masterful, Michelangelo's heart longed for something more solid, more eternal. Painting, though beautiful, was not enough. It was marble that called to him, with its cold permanence, its promise of immortality. It was during these years that Michelangelo's destiny truly began to unfold. While working under the patronage of Lorenzo de' Medici, the most powerful man in Florence, Michelangelo was introduced to the classical sculptures of ancient Greece and Rome. These works, with their perfect proportions, their idealized forms, seemed to Michelangelo like echoes from the divine. They spoke of a beauty that transcended time, a beauty that was both human and godlike. Michelangelo, still only a youth, knew in his heart that he was born to create such beauty, to elevate humanity through his art. One day, as he stood in the gardens of the Medici Palace, his eyes fell upon a discarded block of marble, rough, untouched, and overlooked by the other artists who saw it as too flawed to be of use. But Michelangelo did not see the imperfections. He saw, deep within the stone, the shape of a figure waiting to be released. It was as if the marble whispered to him, as if it held a secret that only his hands could unlock. With a sense of purpose that belied his years, Michelangelo took up his chisel and hammer and began to work. The days and nights that followed were a blur of creation, each strike of the hammer bringing the figure within the marble closer to life. As Michelangelo worked, he lost himself in the rhythm of the stone, in the delicate balance between force and finesse. And slowly, as if emerging from a dream, the figure took shape. It was the face of an ancient Roman faun, its expression playful, its features exquisitely rendered. When Lorenzo de' Medici saw the sculpture, he was astounded by the skill, the vision, of this young apprentice. Michelangelo had not simply carved a figure, he had breathed life into the stone, awakening it with a spark of the divine. And so, Michelangelo's journey truly began. He had found his calling, his purpose. With each passing day, his talent grew, honed by the guidance of the Medici court and fueled by his insatiable hunger for perfection. He studied anatomy with an almost obsessive passion, dissecting the human form to understand every muscle, every sinew, so that he could capture it in his art with unparalleled precision. His hands became instruments of creation, capable of shaping the most delicate features from the hardest of stones. But Michelangelo's genius was not just in his technical skill, it was in his ability to see beyond the surface, to capture the soul within the stone. He did not merely sculpt bodies, he sculpted emotions, capturing the very essence of life itself in his work. Whether it was the serene face of a Madonna or the powerful figure of a David, Michelangelo's creations seemed to pulse with life, with humanity. As Michelangelo's fame grew, so too did the scope of his ambition. He would go on to carve some of the most iconic works of art in history, the towering statue of David, the awe-inspiring frescoes of the Sistine Chapel, the haunting Pietà. Each work was a testament to his vision, his genius, his relentless pursuit of the divine in the human form. But it all began with a boy from Tuscany, a boy with a dream as vast as the marble mountains from which he would carve his masterpieces. Michelangelo's journey was not just the story of an artist, it was the story of a soul in search of perfection, of a man who believed that through art, humanity could touch the divine. So, dear listener, as you lie here, wrapped in the quiet of the night, let the story of Michelangelo wash over you. Let his passion, his brilliance, inspire you to see the beauty in the world around you, to seek the divine in the everyday. For Michelangelo's story is not just one of stone and chisel, it is a reminder that within each of us lies the power to create, to transform, and to elevate the world through our own unique gifts. In the city of Florence, where the Arno River quietly flows and the golden light of the Tuscan sun bathes the ancient buildings, Michelangelo's world began to take shape. Florence, at the height of the Renaissance, was a place where art and intellect were woven into the very fabric of everyday life. Here, the streets were alive with the footsteps of poets, philosophers, architects, and painters, men whose names would echo through history. But among them, it was Michelangelo, with his chisels and brushes, who would carve his legacy into the heart of this extraordinary city. Florence was a city unlike any other, a jewel of civilization that shone brightly as a beacon of culture and creativity. The Medici family ruled over it, not with the iron fist of typical rulers, but with a passion for the arts that nurtured the greatest minds and talents of the age. They built grand palaces and commissioned stunning works of art, making Florence the cradle of the Renaissance. The city itself was like a living gallery, where every street corner held a piece of history, and every building seemed to breathe with the soul of the artists who had crafted it. For Michelangelo, Florence was more than just a home, it was a source of inspiration, a place where the boundaries of human achievement were constantly being pushed. He would walk through the piazzas and narrow streets, absorbing the energy of the city, his mind filled with the works of great artists who had come before him. The grand cathedrals, the towering statues, the frescoes that adorned the walls of the churches, each one spoke to him in a language of beauty and perfection that Michelangelo longed to master. But Florence was not just a city of beauty, it was a city of tension, of contrasts. While art flourished, so too did political strife and power struggles. The Medici family, powerful patrons of the arts, ruled with an elegance that belied the darker undercurrents of control and influence. Florence was a place where brilliance and ambition walked hand in hand with intrigue and danger. And in this complex web of art and power, Michelangelo found himself not just an observer but a participant. Even as a young apprentice, Michelangelo was drawn to the life of the city. He would visit the bustling workshops where marble was sculpted into life, where frescoes took form on vast cathedral walls, and where the human spirit was immortalized in paint and stone. The artists who filled these spaces were his first teachers, masters like Domenico Ghirlandaio, who guided Michelangelo in the art of fresco, and Bertoldo di Giovanni, who introduced him to the world of sculpture. Under their tutelage, Michelangelo's hands learned the delicate balance between force and precision, between imagination and form. Yet Michelangelo was never content to simply learn, he needed to surpass. His mind was always racing ahead, always striving for something greater, something more perfect. He would spend hours sketching in the city's churches, studying the works of the great masters, but even as he admired them, he sought to push beyond their achievements. He was fascinated by the human body, not just its external beauty, but its inner workings, the way muscles moved, the way bones gave structure. To him, every human form was a puzzle waiting to be unlocked, every face a story waiting to be told. At times, Michelangelo's intense focus set him apart from others. His fellow apprentices would marvel at his dedication, his almost obsessive drive to perfect every stroke of the brush, every cut of the chisel. While they laughed and joked, Michelangelo would remain at his workbench, his mind consumed with the vision of what could be, of what he could create. It was as if he saw the world through a different lens, one that stripped away the mundane and revealed the divine patterns hidden beneath. One of Michelangelo's earliest breakthroughs came in his teenage years, when he began working with marble, the medium that would become his true love. For Michelangelo, marble was not just stone, it was a living, breathing entity waiting to be freed from its rough surface. He would often say that he did not create sculptures, he simply uncovered the figures that were already within the stone, waiting for someone to release them. And so, with each block of marble he touched, Michelangelo would listen closely to its whispers, feeling the shape within and slowly, carefully, bringing it to life. Florence, too, seemed to echo with the whispers of history. Michelangelo could feel the presence of the great minds that had walked the city's streets before him, Dante, whose poetry had shaped the Italian language, Giotto, whose frescoes had redefined the possibilities of painting, and Brunelleschi, whose architectural genius had crowned the city with the great dome of the Duomo. Michelangelo saw himself as part of this grand tradition, but he also knew that his path would be uniquely his own. As Michelangelo's skills grew, so too did his ambition. He wanted to create works that would not just be admired, but would endure, works that would speak to the deepest parts of the human soul. And he was not alone in this desire. The Medici family, seeing the brilliance in the young artist, took him under their wing, providing him with resources, connections, and opportunities that few could dream of. Under their patronage, Michelangelo flourished, and Florence became his canvas. But even as his reputation grew, Michelangelo remained restless. The city of Florence, with all its beauty and grandeur, could never fully contain his vision. His mind was always pushing beyond the city walls toward a higher understanding of art and creation. He would spend long hours in the Medici gardens, sketching the ancient sculptures that filled the grounds, absorbing the lessons of the past and transforming them into something new. Michelangelo's Florence was a place of endless possibility, where the Renaissance spirit flowed through every street and every workshop. But for Michelangelo, it was also a place of deep introspection. The city's vibrant energy fueled his creativity, but it was in the quiet moments, in the stillness of the night, that his most profound thoughts would take root. In those moments, as the stars hung over the city like distant beacons, Michelangelo would dream of the masterpieces that were yet to come, works that would transcend the city, the era, and even the artist himself. In Florence, Michelangelo was not just shaped by the world around him, he, in turn, shaped it. The city and the artist were intertwined, each influencing the other, each pushing the boundaries of what could be achieved. As Florence soared to new heights in art, culture, and thought, Michelangelo's genius lifted with it, like a bird rising into the heavens, carrying with him the hopes and dreams of an entire generation. And so, the boy from Tuscany, born under the quiet hills, became the man who would forever change the face of art. Florence was his starting point, his muse, but Michelangelo's journey was far from over. His destiny, like the sculptures he so carefully crafted, was waiting to be revealed, one chisel stroke at a time. As Michelangelo grew into his art, so too did the world around him change. The city of Florence had been his cradle, but soon the pull of destiny would lead him beyond its walls, into the heart of challenges that would test not just his skill, but his very soul. It was in this broader world, amidst the shifting tides of politics, religion, and personal ambition, that Michelangelo would truly find his place in history through his most monumental and celebrated creation, David. The story of David begins with a block of marble, one that had lain dormant for over 40 years in the courtyards of Florence, untouched and unwanted. This marble was flawed, abandoned by other sculptors who deemed it too difficult to work with, its surface marred by imperfections, its shape too narrow for any grand design. But to Michelangelo, this discarded block of stone was not a failure. No, it was a challenge, a sleeping giant that, with the right hands, could be awakened. In the early dawn of the 1500s, Michelangelo, now a young man, but already celebrated for his talents, was summoned to take on a commission that others had shied away from. The marble was enormous, nearly 17 feet tall, and its flawed surface made it a risky undertaking for any artist. Yet, when Michelangelo gazed upon it, he saw not a problem but potential. Deep within its cold, solid core, he could already envision the figure waiting to be freed, a figure that would embody the spirit of Florence itself. The commission was for the biblical hero David, the young shepherd boy who had defeated the giant Goliath with nothing but a slingshot and his unshakable faith. For Florence, David was more than a biblical figure. He was a symbol of the city's own resilience and strength, a testament to its ability to stand against larger, more powerful forces. At the time, Florence was a city-state, surrounded by powerful enemies, and David was a perfect metaphor for the city's struggle. Michelangelo's task was to capture this spirit in stone, to give form to the ideals of courage, defiance, and beauty in the face of adversity. For 2 years, Michelangelo worked in secrecy, shrouded in mystery as he chipped away at the marble, day after day, night after night. He worked alone, his only companions the faint sounds of his hammer and chisel echoing through the workshop. Slowly, with each precise strike, the figure of David began to emerge from the stone, as if the marble itself was yielding to Michelangelo's will, revealing the hero within. Michelangelo's genius was not just in his ability to sculpt, it was in his ability to see what others could not, to look at an untouched block of stone and envision life beneath its surface. David, as Michelangelo saw him, was not the youthful, innocent boy that earlier artists had portrayed. No, Michelangelo's David was a young man on the cusp of greatness, his body taut with anticipation, his gaze intense and focused. This David was not in the act of battle, rather, he stood in the moment before, still, poised, yet filled with a quiet, powerful energy that seemed ready to burst forth at any second. Michelangelo captured this tension perfectly, in the subtle twist of David's torso, in the way his muscles seemed both relaxed and ready for action, in the steady calm of his expression. It was a moment frozen in time, the calm before the storm. When Michelangelo unveiled the statue, the people of Florence were awestruck. David stood before them, towering and majestic, a symbol of their city's defiant spirit. Carved with an exquisite attention to detail, every muscle, every vein, every expression was so lifelike that the marble seemed to breathe. Michelangelo had not just sculpted a hero, he had sculpted Florence itself, capturing the city's pride, its determination, and its belief in the power of the individual to triumph over the odds. David was placed in the Piazza della Signoria, right in front of the Palazzo Vecchio, the seat of Florence's government. There, he stood as a sentinel, a reminder to all who passed of Florence's strength and resilience. And yet, there was something more to David, something deeper. While David's outward appearance was that of a warrior, ready to face any challenge, his expression hinted at something more reflective. His gaze, though focused, carried a trace of doubt, of contemplation. It was as if Michelangelo had imbued him with not just physical strength, but the weight of responsibility, the burden of leadership, the uncertainty of what lay ahead. For Michelangelo, David was not just a statue, it was a personal triumph. In carving the figure, he had proven himself not only to Florence, but to the world. He had taken a block of marble that others had deemed unworkable and transformed it into one of the greatest masterpieces of all time. And yet, in doing so, Michelangelo also revealed something about himself, a glimpse of the inner struggle between perfection and imperfection, between ambition and doubt, between the divine and the human. But David's story did not end with its unveiling. As the years passed, the statue took on a life of its own, becoming a symbol not just of Florence, but of the Renaissance itself. Artists and thinkers from across Europe came to admire it, to study its proportions, to marvel at its balance of grace and power. Michelangelo's David became the embodiment of the Renaissance ideal, where art, intellect, and humanity converged in perfect harmony. Even now, centuries later, David stands as a testament to Michelangelo's genius. Tourists from every corner of the globe flock to see it, their eyes widening as they gaze upon the marble figure that seems almost alive. They, too, feel the same awe that the people of Florence must have felt on that day when Michelangelo first revealed his creation to the world. David, poised and powerful, stands as an eternal reminder of the potential within each of us to rise above the challenges we face, to carve beauty out of difficulty, and to find strength in our most vulnerable moments. For Michelangelo, David was only the beginning. His journey as an artist, as a visionary, was far from over. But in this one masterpiece, he had already left an indelible mark on history, one that would echo through the ages, as timeless and unyielding as the marble from which it was born. The statue of David stood as a towering symbol of Florence's strength, a masterpiece that captured the spirit of a city that had long fought against its powerful enemies. But for Michelangelo, David was more than just a triumph of artistry. It was the moment that truly cemented his reputation as one of the greatest sculptors of all time. And yet, this was only the beginning of his journey. His next challenge would not come in the form of marble, but as a project so grand, so vast, that it would push him to the limits of his endurance, both physically and mentally. It was a commission that Michelangelo would initially resist, but one that would ultimately define his legacy forever: the Sistine Chapel ceiling. It began, as so many grand endeavors do, with a request from power. In 1508, Pope Julius II summoned Michelangelo to Rome. The Pope, known for his fiery temper and grand ambitions, had great plans for the Sistine Chapel, the private chapel of the Vatican where the most sacred ceremonies of the Catholic Church were held. Pope Julius wanted Michelangelo to paint the chapel's ceiling, a task that would involve covering over 12,000 square feet of surface with intricate frescoes. But Michelangelo, now at the height of his fame as a sculptor, was reluctant. He saw himself as a man of stone, not paint. He was a master of the chisel, not the brush. Yet, despite his protests, Michelangelo could not refuse the Pope's command. And so, reluctantly, he agreed to take on the project, though he likely had little idea of the immense challenge that lay ahead. The Sistine Chapel, with its high, arched ceiling, was like a vast canvas waiting to be filled. But it was also a daunting and nearly impossible task. Michelangelo would have to work high above the ground, on scaffolding, lying on his back for hours at a time. The fresco technique required him to apply wet plaster and paint quickly before the plaster dried, meaning there was no room for error. The physical toll was immense. Day after day, Michelangelo would climb up the scaffolding, his neck craned upwards, his body twisted into uncomfortable positions as he painted. The work was grueling, painful, and exhausting. Yet, despite the hardship, Michelangelo threw himself into the task with his characteristic determination. He saw the ceiling not merely as a surface to be decorated, but as a place where the entire story of humanity could unfold. This was not to be just another fresco. It would be a grand vision of creation, sin, and redemption, a visual epic that would sweep across the heavens and leave those who saw it in awe. Michelangelo began to sketch his designs, and soon the scope of his ambition became clear. The ceiling would be divided into sections, each telling a different part of the biblical story of Genesis, from the creation of the world to the fall of man and the eventual promise of salvation. At the center of it all, the most iconic image of Michelangelo's career would take shape: the creation of Adam. In this scene, Michelangelo depicted the moment of divine creation, when God, floating through the heavens, reaches out to give life to Adam, the first man. The two figures, God and Adam, extend their hands towards each other, their fingers almost touching, the spark of life about to be passed between them. It is a moment suspended in time, filled with tension and grace. Adam's body, sculpted with the same care and precision that Michelangelo had once lavished on David, is full of potential, a symbol of humanity's perfect form, while God's figure is full of power and divine authority. But the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel was not just about individual figures. It was a symphony of interconnected scenes, each one flowing into the next, creating a sense of movement and storytelling that had never been seen before. Around the central panels, Michelangelo painted prophets and sibyls, ancient seers who foretold the coming of Christ, along with smaller scenes of biblical stories and the ancestors of Jesus. Each figure was carefully designed, their faces filled with emotion, their bodies twisted in complex poses that revealed Michelangelo's deep understanding of human anatomy. For 4 long years, Michelangelo worked tirelessly on the ceiling. He faced numerous setbacks, his health suffered, the physical strain of the work caused constant pain, and the pressure from the Pope was relentless. But through it all, Michelangelo continued, driven by a vision that only he could see. It was as if he was not just painting a ceiling, but creating an entire universe, one brushstroke at a time. Finally, in 1512, the ceiling was completed. When it was unveiled to the public, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The sheer scale and beauty of the frescoes left people speechless. Michelangelo had done more than simply paint a ceiling. He had transformed the Sistine Chapel into a living testament to the power of faith, art, and the human spirit. The figures he had created seemed to leap from the plaster, their forms so lifelike that they appeared to be on the verge of stepping down into the chapel below. The depth of emotion, the intricacy of the design, and the boldness of the composition were unlike anything the world had ever seen. The Sistine Chapel ceiling remains one of the most iconic works of art in human history, a masterpiece that has been studied, admired, and revered for centuries. But for Michelangelo, it was not just a triumph of skill, it was a triumph of will. He had taken on a task that had seemed impossible and turned it into one of the greatest artistic achievements of all time. In doing so, he had proven not only his mastery of sculpture but also his genius as a painter and storyteller. And yet, even as the world marveled at the ceiling, Michelangelo himself was never fully satisfied. He was a man driven by perfection, and no matter how much praise he received, he always saw the flaws, the places where he could have done better. But perhaps that is what made him great, his relentless pursuit of excellence, his refusal to settle for anything less than the extraordinary. With the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo had transcended the limitations of his medium, creating a work that was not just beautiful, but profound. It was a story of humanity's place in the cosmos, of the struggle between sin and redemption, of the divine reaching out to touch the human. And in the space between God and Adam's fingertips, in that tiny, almost imperceptible gap, Michelangelo captured the essence of what it means to be human, the longing for connection, for understanding, for life itself. Michelangelo's journey was far from over, but with the Sistine Chapel, he had secured his place in history as one of the greatest artists the world would ever know. After the towering success of David and the awe-inspiring feat of painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling, Michelangelo's reputation as a master of his craft reached heights few could ever dream of. However, his next great challenge would not be with paint or marble, but with the creation of a monument so grand in scale and ambition that it would consume much of his life. This monumental project was the tomb of Pope Julius II, a task that would span decades, bring Michelangelo both triumph and frustration, and lead to the creation of one of his most iconic sculptures, the Moses. The story begins in 1505, when Pope Julius II, known as the warrior pope for his military campaigns, decided he wanted a tomb that would match his larger-than-life persona. He envisioned a mausoleum that would be nothing short of spectacular, an eternal resting place that would stand as a testament to his power, authority, and legacy. And who better to design such a monument than Michelangelo, the man whose genius had already reshaped the artistic world? Michelangelo, at the height of his fame and confidence, took on the commission with enthusiasm. The original design for the tomb was nothing short of breathtaking, a towering structure filled with over 40 life-size statues, including allegorical figures, biblical heroes, and angels. The centerpiece of the tomb was to be a colossal statue of Pope Julius himself, seated majestically atop the monument, surrounded by depictions of victory, strength, and divine protection. It was to be a masterpiece unlike any the world had ever seen, a blend of sculpture, architecture, and spiritual symbolism that would elevate the art of tomb design to new heights. For Michelangelo, this project was a dream, a chance to combine his love for sculpture with his architectural vision and to create something truly monumental. He envisioned the tomb as a kind of sculpted narrative, where each statue and each detail would contribute to the story of Pope Julius's power and piety. It would be a monument not only to the Pope, but to the greatness of the human spirit, immortalized in marble. But as often happens with grand ambitions, reality soon intervened. Political upheaval, war, and the shifting priorities of the Vatican began to take their toll on the project. Pope Julius's attention was drawn away to other matters, and funding for the tomb began to dwindle. Despite Michelangelo's passion and relentless work, the project was repeatedly delayed, revised, and eventually scaled down to a fraction of its original design. For Michelangelo, this was a bitter blow. The tomb of Pope Julius II, which he had once envisioned as his magnum opus, became a source of constant frustration. For years, Michelangelo was forced to put the project on hold as the Pope redirected resources to other priorities, including the construction of St. Peter's Basilica. Michelangelo, who had poured his heart into the design of the tomb, found himself pulled away from the project time and time again, his dreams of completing it slipping further from his grasp. And yet, despite these setbacks, Michelangelo's genius could not be stifled. Though the tomb was never completed as originally planned, Michelangelo's work on the project led to the creation of some of his most celebrated sculptures, including the iconic Moses. Commissioned as one of the central figures for the tomb, Moses became a symbol not only of the biblical lawgiver but also of Michelangelo's own struggle with authority, ambition, and disappointment. The Moses stands as one of Michelangelo's greatest achievements in sculpture. Carved from a single block of marble, the statue depicts the prophet in a moment of intense contemplation and power. His muscular form is rendered with exquisite detail, his beard flowing down his chest like a river of stone. In one hand, he holds the tablets of the law, while his other hand rests upon his knee, his body caught in a moment of tension, as if he is about to rise and act. His expression is fierce, his brow furrowed in deep thought, his eyes blazing with divine purpose. But there is more to Moses than just physical power. Michelangelo imbued the statue with a deep sense of inner conflict. Moses is not simply a leader, he is a man who carries the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. His posture, though regal, suggests a man burdened by the struggles of his people, by the demands of faith and leadership. The veins that bulge from his forearms, the taut muscles of his legs, all of these details speak to the intense emotions that Michelangelo captured in stone. And then, there are the horns. In a curious detail, Michelangelo sculpted Moses with two small horns protruding from his head. This feature, though strange to modern viewers, was based on a mistranslation of the Hebrew Bible, where Moses was described as having a radiant face after receiving the Ten Commandments. In some early Latin translations, the word for radiant was misinterpreted as horned, leading to depictions of Moses with horns throughout medieval art. Michelangelo, drawing on this tradition, included the horns in his sculpture, adding a unique and mystical element to the already powerful figure. For Michelangelo, Moses was more than just a biblical figure, it was a reflection of his own inner struggles. The frustration of the incomplete tomb, the delays, the political maneuvering, all of these tensions found their way into the statue. Like Moses, Michelangelo was a man caught between divine inspiration and human limitation, between the grandeur of his vision and the reality of what he could achieve. The intensity of Moses' gaze, the strength of his form, and the weight of his presence all speak to Michelangelo's own battle to create something eternal in a world that often felt fleeting and uncertain. Despite the setbacks and disappointments surrounding the tomb of Pope Julius II, Moses remains a testament to Michelangelo's genius. Though the tomb was never completed as originally envisioned, the figures that Michelangelo did sculpt, Moses among them, stand as some of the finest examples of Renaissance art. The monument, though scaled down and incomplete, still carries with it the grandeur and ambition that Michelangelo had hoped for. And Moses, seated in quiet strength, continues to inspire awe in all who gaze upon him. As the years passed and the project faded into history, Michelangelo would move on to other great works. But the tomb of Pope Julius II, and the figure of Moses at its center, would remain a symbol of both Michelangelo's boundless ambition and the relentless struggles he faced throughout his career. In that marble form, Michelangelo had captured not only the image of a biblical hero but also the essence of his own artistic journey, a journey defined by immense talent, unyielding determination, and the desire to create something that would stand the test of time. As the years passed and the tomb of Pope Julius II remained incomplete, the frustration Michelangelo felt was palpable. The grand vision he had once held for the tomb had been whittled down to a much smaller and less ambitious project, a shadow of what he had intended. And yet, amidst this disappointment, Michelangelo's hands continued to shape marble, creating works that would endure far beyond the political squabbles and delays that haunted the tomb. One of these works, alongside Moses, stands as a testament to Michelangelo's profound understanding of human emotion and spiritual power, The Dying Slave. The Dying Slave was originally intended to be part of the larger tomb, one of many figures meant to accompany Pope Julius II on his journey to eternity. But like so many other elements of the project, the statue never found its place on the final monument. Instead, it became a standalone masterpiece, a reflection of Michelangelo's ability to capture the profound complexities of the human condition. Carved from a single block of marble, the dying slave is a figure frozen in the midst of release, caught between the agonies of life and the peace of death. His body, sculpted with Michelangelo's characteristic attention to detail, is muscular and strong, yet there is a deep sense of fragility in the way he is positioned. His head tilts back, eyes closed, as if in surrender. His arm, once strong and powerful, now drapes across his chest, as though he is letting go of the burdens of life. In The Dying Slave, Michelangelo captured not just a moment of physical transition, but a deeper spiritual one. The figure seems to be on the cusp of transcendence, his body still bound by the limitations of flesh, yet his soul reaching for something beyond. There is an elegance in his pose, a quiet dignity in his suffering. It is as if Michelangelo has taken the very essence of the human experience, the pain, the beauty, the yearning for freedom, and carved it into stone. And yet, the dying slave is not a figure of despair. There is a strange serenity in his expression, a calm acceptance of the inevitable. Michelangelo, who had spent years grappling with his own frustrations over the tomb, seems to have poured all of his feelings of constraint, of being trapped by circumstance, into the marble. But rather than bitterness or anger, Michelangelo infused the figure with a sense of peace, as though he had come to terms with the limitations of life, with the fact that not all dreams can be fully realized. The dying slave was paired with another statue, the rebellious slave, which portrayed a very different kind of struggle. Where the dying slave seemed to be accepting his fate, the rebellious slave fought against it, his body twisted and contorted in resistance. Together, these two figures represented two sides of the same coin, the tension between surrender and defiance, between the acceptance of life's limitations and the struggle to break free from them. Michelangelo's mastery of the human form is on full display in these figures. Every muscle, every curve of the body is rendered with an almost divine precision, yet there is nothing static about the statues. The dying slave and the rebellious slave are alive with emotion, with the dynamic energy of their internal struggles. Even in stillness, Michelangelo's figures seem to move, to breathe, to inhabit the space around them with a quiet power. But beyond their technical brilliance, what truly sets these statues apart is the depth of feeling Michelangelo imbued within them. The dying slave, in particular, speaks to the artist's understanding of the human soul, its fragility, its strength, its capacity for suffering and for beauty. Michelangelo, who had spent so much of his life wrestling with the demands of his patrons, with the weight of expectation, and with his own perfectionism, seemed to find in the dying slave a kind of release. It was as if, through this figure, he had come to a deeper understanding of himself, of the nature of art, and of life itself. The unfinished nature of the dying slave and the rebellious slave only adds to their mystique. Left incomplete due to the many interruptions and changes to the tomb project, these figures seem to speak to the idea that art, like life, is always in a state of becoming. Michelangelo often spoke of his sculptures as being free from the marble, as if the figures were already there, waiting to be released. In the dying slave, there is a sense that the figure is still in the process of being liberated, not just from the stone, but from the very limitations of existence. Though the tomb of Pope Julius II was never completed as Michelangelo had envisioned, the figures he created for it stand as some of the most powerful examples of Renaissance art. The dying slave, in particular, transcends its original purpose, becoming a symbol of the human condition itself, of the way we are all, in some way, bound by the constraints of life, and yet, in the same breath, striving for something greater. For Michelangelo, the dying slave was more than just a statue, it was a reflection of his own life, his own journey as an artist and as a man. It was a testament to the idea that, even in the face of disappointment and unfinished dreams, there is beauty to be found in the struggle, in the very act of creation. In the dying slave, Michelangelo left us not just with a masterpiece of marble, but with a quiet, enduring truth that to live is to strive, to suffer, and, ultimately, to seek transcendence. After years of sculpting masterpieces and wrestling with grand commissions, Michelangelo found himself drawn into yet another monumental project, one that would not only define the architecture of the Renaissance but also cement his legacy as one of the greatest architects in history. This was the commission to design the dome of St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City, a task that would challenge Michelangelo in entirely new ways and push his creativity and ambition to unprecedented heights. The story of Michelangelo and St. Peter's Basilica begins long before the artist even set foot in Rome. The Basilica, one of the holiest sites in Christianity, had been under construction for decades, with numerous architects and artists contributing to its evolving design. Pope Julius II had originally commissioned the basilica in 1506, but by the time Michelangelo became involved, progress had been slow, and the grand vision for the church was still far from being realized. Various architects had taken turns overseeing the project, each leaving their own mark, but no one had yet succeeded in creating the crowning glory of the basilica, the Great Dome. By the time Michelangelo was called upon, he was already in his 70s, his body worn from a lifetime of hard work. Yet despite his age, his mind remained sharp, his artistic vision undimmed. In 1546, he was asked to take over as chief architect of St. Peter's Basilica, and though he initially resisted the appointment, feeling that architecture was not his primary calling, he could not refuse such an important project. He accepted the task, knowing full well that it would be one of the most challenging undertakings of his life. The dome of St. Peter's Basilica was not just any architectural feature, it was to be the symbol of the Catholic Church, towering above the Vatican, visible from miles away. It had to be majestic, awe-inspiring, and worthy of the grandeur of the basilica below. The sheer scale of the dome was daunting, and the technical challenges were immense. But Michelangelo was no stranger to seemingly impossible tasks, and once he committed to the project, he threw himself into it with the same intensity and passion that had defined his entire career. Michelangelo's first task was to review the plans that had been left by his predecessors. The most influential design up to that point had been created by Donato Bramante, who had envisioned a Greek cross-shaped basilica with a massive central dome. However, Bramante's design was considered overly ambitious, and several subsequent architects had made revisions, leading to a confusing array of ideas and partial constructions. Michelangelo, with his keen eye for both beauty and practicality, decided to return to Bramante's original vision, but with modifications that would ensure both the structural integrity and aesthetic harmony of the basilica. What set Michelangelo apart as an architect was his ability to think like a sculptor. He understood the importance of form and balance, of how light and shadow could interact with a structure to create a sense of divine presence. In designing the dome, Michelangelo sought to create not just a functional architectural element, but a work of art in its own right, a structure that would lift the eyes of those who entered the basilica and make them feel as though they were gazing into the heavens. The dome Michelangelo designed was a double-shell structure, with two layers that allowed for both strength and elegance. The outer shell, visible from the outside, was tall and graceful, curving upward into a lantern that would crown the top of the dome. The inner shell provided the necessary support, allowing the dome to span the vast space of the basilica below without collapsing under its own weight. Michelangelo's design was both innovative and daring, pushing the limits of what was possible with the materials and techniques of the time. One of the greatest challenges Michelangelo faced was ensuring that the dome would be structurally sound. The sheer size of the dome meant that any small miscalculation could lead to disaster. Michelangelo worked closely with engineers and builders, overseeing every detail of the construction. He designed the dome with a sense of rhythm and proportion that made it appear light and airy, even though it was built from heavy stone. His deep understanding of geometry and physics, combined with his artistic intuition, allowed him to create a design that was both beautiful and stable. As construction progressed, Michelangelo faced numerous obstacles. There were political struggles within the Vatican, financial difficulties, and, of course, the physical demands of the project. Michelangelo, now in his 80s, had to contend with the limitations of his aging body, but he never wavered in his commitment to seeing the project through. He spent countless hours at the construction site, guiding the workers, checking measurements, and making adjustments to ensure that everything was executed to perfection. Unfortunately, Michelangelo would not live to see the completion of the dome. He passed away in 1564 at the age of 88, leaving behind detailed plans and models for the final stages of construction. After his death, the dome was completed by Giacomo della Porta, who remained faithful to Michelangelo's design. The finished dome, standing over 136 meters tall, became the crowning glory of St. Peter's Basilica, a symbol of the Catholic Church's power and Michelangelo's enduring genius. Even today, centuries later, the dome of St. Peter's Basilica continues to inspire awe in all who gaze upon it. Its graceful curves and monumental scale make it one of the most recognizable landmarks in the world, a testament to the vision and determination of the man who designed it. Michelangelo's dome is more than just a piece of architecture. It is a symbol of human ingenuity, of the ability to create something lasting and beautiful in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. For Michelangelo, the Dome of St. Peter's was not just another project, it was a reflection of his lifelong belief that art and faith are intertwined, that through the act of creation, humanity can touch the divine. In designing the dome, Michelangelo sought to create a space where the heavens and the earth would meet, where those who entered the basilica would feel the presence of something greater than themselves. And in doing so, he left behind a legacy that continues to inspire wonder and reverence to this day. Michelangelo's work on St. Peter's Basilica stands as a fitting culmination of a life spent in pursuit of artistic excellence. It is a reminder that, even in his final years, Michelangelo's creative spirit burned as brightly as ever, guiding him to achieve the impossible. His dome is not just a structure of stone and mortar, it is a work of art, a masterpiece of human endeavor, and a beacon of hope and faith that will stand for generations to come. In the long and storied career of Michelangelo, one of the most hauntingly beautiful works he ever created was the Pietà, a sculpture that captures not only his extraordinary skill as a sculptor, but also the depth of emotion and spiritual resonance that came to define his art. The Pietà, which depicts the Virgin Mary cradling the dead body of Christ in her lap after his crucifixion, is a masterpiece of tragic beauty, a work that transcends time and space, touching the hearts of all who gaze upon it. The story of the Pietà begins in 1498, when Michelangelo was still a young man in his early 20s. A French cardinal named Jean de Billers commissioned the sculpture for his tomb in St. Peter's Basilica. It was an ambitious project, but one that Michelangelo accepted with a determination to create something truly extraordinary. Little did he know that this work, which would take less than 2 years to complete, would go on to become one of the most iconic and beloved sculptures in the history of Western art. The Pietà represents one of the most intimate and heart-wrenching moments in the Christian narrative, the moment when Mary, the mother of Jesus, holds her son's lifeless body in her arms, consumed by grief. But Michelangelo's interpretation of this moment is unlike any that had come before. Where other artists had depicted Mary as an older woman, broken by the weight of her sorrow, Michelangelo chose to portray her as youthful, serene, and filled with a quiet strength. It was a decision that shocked some of his contemporaries, but Michelangelo's vision was deeply symbolic. For him, Mary's youth was a reflection of her purity, her eternal innocence. In her face, we do not see the ravages of time, but rather the eternal, ageless beauty of a mother's love. The Pietà was carved from a single block of Carrara marble, the same flawless white stone that Michelangelo favored for many of his greatest works. As he began to shape the marble, Michelangelo approached the sculpture not just as a physical representation of a biblical scene, but as a spiritual exercise. Each chisel stroke was deliberate, each curve and contour carefully considered to bring out the deepest emotions of the figures. He wanted the marble to feel alive, to speak to those who would look upon it, and to evoke in them the same sense of awe and reverence that he felt as he worked. At the heart of the Pietà is the extraordinary relationship between the two figures, Mary and Christ. Christ's body, lifeless and heavy, is draped across Mary's lap in a pose of ultimate surrender. His limbs, beautifully sculpted with Michelangelo's unmatched understanding of anatomy, seem to almost melt into the folds of Mary's robe. The detail is so meticulous that even the veins on Christ's arms are visible, a testament to Michelangelo's mastery of the human form. And yet, despite the physical weight of Christ's body, there is an ethereal lightness to the composition. Mary's robes cascade around her in soft, flowing lines, creating a sense of grace and tranquility. Her left hand, palm open and facing upward, seems to question the divine mystery of her son's death, while her right hand gently supports the broken body of Christ, cradling him with the tender care of a mother who knows her child is beyond pain. In this delicate interplay between weight and weightlessness, between sorrow and serenity, Michelangelo imbues the Pietà with a sense of otherworldly calm. What makes the Pietà so deeply moving is the way in which Michelangelo manages to convey both the humanity and the divinity of the scene. Christ, though dead, still possesses a kind of divine beauty. His body, though lifeless, seems at peace, as if he has transcended the pain of the crucifixion. Mary, though heartbroken, accepts her son's sacrifice with grace and understanding. The result is a sculpture that is at once deeply personal and profoundly universal, a meditation on suffering, love, and redemption. Michelangelo's ability to evoke emotion in the viewer is perhaps most evident in Mary's face. Though she is mourning the loss of her son, her expression is not one of anguish or despair. Instead, there is a quiet acceptance, a gentle sorrow that speaks of her faith in the divine plan. Her gaze is soft, her features serene, as if she understands that this moment, though filled with pain, is not the end, but the beginning of something greater. In Mary's face, Michelangelo captures the essence of maternal love, unconditional, enduring, and transcendent. The Pietà was completed in 1499 and placed in St. Peter's Basilica, where it was met with immediate acclaim. Pilgrims and artists alike flocked to see the sculpture, marveling at its beauty and the emotions it stirred within them. The Pietà quickly became one of the most beloved religious sculptures in the world, revered not only for its technical brilliance but also for the spiritual depth it conveyed. For Michelangelo, the Pietà represented a turning point in his career. It was the work that established him as one of the greatest sculptors of his time, and it opened the doors to countless other commissions. But more than that, the Pietà was a reflection of Michelangelo's own faith, his belief in the power of art to elevate the soul and bring people closer to the divine. In the centuries since its creation, the Pietà has become a symbol of both the Renaissance and the power of art to express the deepest emotions of the human experience. Its delicate balance of beauty and sorrow, of grace and suffering, continues to move those who stand before it, just as it did when Michelangelo first revealed it to the world. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about the Pietà is the way in which it transcends its religious context. While it is undeniably a work of Christian devotion, its themes of loss, love, and acceptance are universal. The Pietà speaks to the heart of what it means to be human, to experience pain, to love deeply, and to find peace in the face of tragedy. Michelangelo, through his unmatched skill and vision, captured this universal truth in marble, creating a work that will continue to resonate with people from all walks of life for generations to come. Even today, the Pietà remains one of the most visited and admired works of art in the world. It stands as a testament not only to Michelangelo's genius but also to the enduring power of art to touch the human soul. For in the Pietà, we see not just the story of Christ and Mary, but the story of every mother, every son, and every person who has ever loved, lost, and sought meaning in the face of suffering. As Michelangelo's illustrious career continued, his genius expanded beyond sculpture and painting into the realm of architecture, where he would once again make his mark on history. In the later years of his life, Michelangelo took on the monumental task of completing the design and overseeing the construction of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, a project that would not only showcase his brilliance as an architect but also challenge his artistic vision and determination. This commission would represent one of the crowning achievements of his career and would forever alter the skyline of Rome. St. Peter's Basilica, one of the holiest sites in Christendom, had been under construction for many years when Michelangelo was called to take over its design. Originally begun by Pope Julius II in 1506, the project had seen the work of several architects, each leaving their own mark on the evolving design. Donato Bramante had laid the foundation, envisioning a Greek cross plan with a large central dome. However, with Bramante's death and the influence of other architects, the design had become a patchwork of ideas, and progress on the basilica was slow. By the time Michelangelo was appointed as the chief architect in 1546, he was already 71 years old, and the basilica was still far from completion. The project had stalled, and Michelangelo faced the challenge of bringing unity to a structure that had been pieced together over decades by various hands. He was given the daunting task of finishing a building that was not only massive in scale but deeply symbolic for the Catholic Church. Despite his advanced age, Michelangelo accepted the challenge with his characteristic determination, understanding that this would be one of the greatest legacies he would leave behind. Michelangelo's vision for St. Peter's Basilica was both bold and innovative. He respected Bramante's original design but made significant changes that would bring cohesion and grandeur to the structure. Michelangelo's genius lay in his ability to marry the sacred and the artistic, creating a space that was not only functional as a place of worship but also a testament to the beauty of Renaissance art and architecture. His design emphasized balance, proportion, and harmony, qualities that Michelangelo believed were key to elevating the soul and bringing people closer to the divine. One of Michelangelo's most significant contributions to the basilica was his redesign of the dome. The dome of St. Peter's would be the crown jewel of the basilica, a symbol of the heavens towering above the city of Rome. It needed to be grand, awe-inspiring, and structurally sound, given the immense weight it would bear. Michelangelo drew inspiration from Brunelleschi's dome for the Florence Cathedral, but he took the concept even further. His dome was designed as a double-shell structure, with an outer and inner layer that would provide strength while allowing light to fill the space below. This design not only ensured the dome's stability but also gave it an ethereal quality, as if it were floating above the basilica, lifting the eyes of all who entered toward the heavens. The dome itself would come to symbolize both the majesty of the church and the unity of heaven and earth. Michelangelo's understanding of geometry, space, and light allowed him to create a structure that was not only functional but deeply spiritual. To Michelangelo, architecture was not just about walls and roofs, it was about creating a space where the divine could be felt, where the human soul could be elevated by the sheer beauty and grandeur of the design. But Michelangelo's work on St. Peter's Basilica extended beyond the dome. He also made significant changes to the overall plan of the building, simplifying the floor plan from a Greek cross to a Latin cross, which created a more focused, central nave. This design allowed for a greater sense of flow and movement within the basilica, drawing visitors toward the high altar and creating a powerful spiritual journey from the entrance to the heart of the church. Michelangelo's involvement in the construction of St. Peter's was a labor of love, but it was also fraught with challenges. The sheer scale of the project meant that construction was slow, and Michelangelo had to contend with both the limitations of the building materials and the technical difficulties of constructing such a massive dome. Yet, despite the setbacks, Michelangelo remained committed to the project. He spent hours on site, working closely with builders, masons, and engineers, ensuring that every detail met his exacting standards. One of Michelangelo's greatest frustrations was that he knew he would not live to see the basilica's completion. Though he laid the foundations for much of the design, including the dome, Michelangelo passed away in 1564 at the age of 88, before the project was finished. However, his influence on the basilica was so profound that his successors, including Giacomo della Porta and Domenico Fontana, followed his designs closely, ensuring that Michelangelo's vision was realized. The dome, completed in 1590, stands as a testament to Michelangelo's architectural genius, rising majestically above St. Peter's Basilica and visible from across the city of Rome. Michelangelo's work on St. Peter's Basilica is more than just a feat of engineering, It is a symbol of the Renaissance spirit, a merging of art, faith, and innovation that has inspired generations of architects, artists, and believers. The Dome of St. Peter's, with its graceful curves and monumental scale, remains one of the most iconic features of the Vatican, a constant reminder of Michelangelo's belief in the power of beauty to elevate the soul. Even today, visitors to St. Peter's Basilica cannot help but be moved by the grandeur of the space Michelangelo helped to create. The play of light on the marble floors, the soaring arches, and the sheer scale of the dome all speak to a divine presence, a sense of being in a place where heaven and earth meet. It is a fitting tribute to Michelangelo, who, through his art and architecture, sought to bring humanity closer to the divine. In the end, Michelangelo's contribution to St. Peter's Basilica is not just a work of architecture, it is a work of faith, a testament to the idea that art and beauty can lead us toward a deeper understanding of the world and of ourselves. Through his designs, Michelangelo left behind a legacy that continues to inspire awe and reverence, a reminder that even in stone and mortar, the human spirit can soar. Among the countless masterpieces Michelangelo created during his lifetime, one stands apart for its delicate balance of tenderness and tragedy, the Pietà. This marble sculpture, depicting the Virgin Mary cradling the lifeless body of her Son, Jesus Christ, is a work that transcends mere artistry, capturing the profound sorrow and grace of one of Christianity's most poignant moments. The Pietà not only reveals Michelangelo's technical brilliance but also his deep understanding of human emotion and spiritual devotion, making it one of the most beloved sculptures in the world. Carved between 1498 and 1499, the Pietà was commissioned by the French Cardinal Jean de Bellairs to adorn his tomb in St. Peter's Basilica. At the time, Michelangelo was still a relatively young artist, yet he approached the project with the confidence and ambition of someone who understood the immense power that sculpture could convey. His vision was not to simply recreate the sorrowful scene of Mary holding the dead Christ, but to evoke a deeper sense of the divine mystery that lay at the heart of the Christian faith, a mother's loss intertwined with the hope of redemption. The first thing that strikes anyone who gazes upon the Pietà is its overwhelming beauty. Michelangelo's skill with marble was unmatched. The folds of Mary's robe seem to ripple like soft fabric, and the smoothness of Christ's body evokes the fragility of human flesh. Yet, beneath this surface perfection lies an extraordinary complexity of emotion. The Pietà captures a moment of both suffering and serenity, of intense grief and quiet acceptance. It is as though Mary, in her sorrow, understands that this is not the end, but part of a divine plan, a sacrifice made for the salvation of humankind. Michelangelo made an unusual choice in his portrayal of Mary. While most artists before him had depicted the Virgin as an older woman, worn by the years of her son's ministry and eventual crucifixion, Michelangelo chose to represent her as a young, serene figure. This decision was rooted in both theological symbolism and artistic intuition. For Michelangelo, Mary's youthful appearance reflected her purity and eternal grace, untouched by time or earthly suffering. Her face, with its calm expression, radiates a quiet strength that transcends the tragedy of the moment. She is not just a grieving mother, she is the embodiment of faith, her serene gaze offering solace even in the face of death. Christ, too, is portrayed with extraordinary sensitivity. His lifeless body rests gently in Mary's lap, his limbs limp and his head tilted back, his sacrifice complete. Michelangelo's mastery of anatomy is evident in every detail, from the delicate veins visible on Christ's arms to the subtle tension in his muscles. Yet, despite the lifelessness of his form, there is a sense of peace in Christ's expression, as though he has found rest after his suffering. The way Michelangelo has arranged Christ's body, with one arm falling gracefully to the side and his legs draped across Mary's lap, creates a feeling of intimacy and tenderness. This is not just the Son of God, but a son, held by his mother in a moment of infinite sorrow. But what truly sets the Pietà apart is the profound emotional connection between the two figures. Though Christ's body is limp and lifeless, Mary holds him with a tenderness that speaks to the depth of their bond. Her right hand supports his torso, while her left hand is open, as if offering him up to the world, or perhaps to God. This gesture, part supplication, part resignation, captures the essence of the sculpture, the acceptance of death as part of a greater spiritual journey. Michelangelo's treatment of the marble itself is nothing short of miraculous. The Pietà seems to defy the hardness of stone, with its smooth, flowing surfaces that mimic the softness of flesh and fabric. The folds of Mary's robe, cascading down in intricate patterns, draw the eye and create a sense of movement, while Christ's still body provides a poignant contrast. This juxtaposition between the active and the passive, between life and death, is at the heart of the Pietà's emotional power. Michelangelo, with his unparalleled skill, managed to capture the fleeting nature of life and the eternal nature of faith in a single block of marble. When the Pietà was unveiled, it was met with immediate acclaim. Visitors to St. Peter's Basilica were struck by its beauty and the depth of feeling it conveyed. It was unlike anything they had seen before, a sculpture that not only represented a sacred moment but also touched the very core of human emotion. For Michelangelo, the Pietà marked a turning point in his career, establishing him as one of the greatest sculptors of his time. But more than that, it was a personal triumph, a reflection of his own spiritual beliefs and his ability to infuse his art with a sense of the divine. The Pietà also carries a signature moment in Michelangelo's life. After the sculpture was completed and received with great praise, it is said that Michelangelo overheard a group of people attributing the work to another artist. Angered by this, Michelangelo, who was still only in his early 20s, secretly returned to the basilica one night and carved his name into the sash that runs across Mary's chest. This was the only time Michelangelo ever signed one of his works, and the inscription reads, "Michelangelo Buonarroti, Florentine, made this." It was a bold declaration of his authorship and a rare glimpse into the pride and passion he felt for his creation. Over the centuries, the Pietà has endured as one of the most celebrated works of Renaissance art. It has inspired countless artists, poets, and believers, its serene beauty offering comfort and reflection to all who stand before it. The sculpture's universal themes of love, loss, and sacrifice resonate with people from all walks of life, transcending its religious context to become a symbol of the human experience. Even today, the Pietà remains a focal point for visitors to St. Peter's Basilica. Its quiet power draws pilgrims and tourists alike, who stand in awe before the marble figures, moved by the simplicity and depth of Michelangelo's vision. The Pietà is more than just a depiction of a biblical scene, it is a meditation on the nature of grief and the possibility of redemption. It reminds us that even in our darkest moments, there is grace to be found, and that through faith, love, and beauty, we can transcend the limitations of the earthly world. For Michelangelo, the Pietà was one of his most personal and meaningful works, a reflection of his deep connection to his faith and his ability to express the most profound human emotions through art. It remains one of the greatest sculptures ever created, a testament to the power of art to communicate not just what we see, but what we feel and what we believe. As Michelangelo entered the later stages of his life, his reputation as one of the greatest artists of all time was firmly established. He had already carved masterpieces like David and painted the Sistine Chapel ceiling, yet his creative journey was far from over. One of his final and most ambitious projects would be the completion of St. Peter's Basilica, the spiritual heart of the Catholic Church, and one of the most important architectural feats of the Renaissance. But alongside this monumental task, Michelangelo found himself increasingly drawn to personal and philosophical reflections that shaped not only his work but also his own spiritual and creative identity. Michelangelo's life was not without its internal struggles. Though outwardly celebrated, he was a man of deep introspection and self-doubt. His relationship with faith, art, and the concept of mortality became more pronounced as he aged. It was during these later years that Michelangelo began to explore architecture more deeply, seeing it as not merely a means of constructing buildings, but as a way of elevating the human spirit toward the divine. At the heart of this transformation was Michelangelo's growing involvement with the completion of St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City. This grand architectural project had been started long before Michelangelo's involvement, but it remained unfinished. Successive popes had appointed various architects over the years to work on it, including the legendary Donato Bramante, whose original design for the basilica featured a Greek cross plan with a massive central dome. However, as political priorities and tastes changed, so too did the designs, leaving the project in disarray by the time Michelangelo was called upon. By 1546, when Michelangelo was appointed as the chief architect of St. Peter's, he was already in his 70s, a time when most artists would have long retired. But Michelangelo was not one to shy away from a challenge, especially one of such immense spiritual and artistic significance. For Michelangelo, this was more than just a professional commission. It was a calling, an opportunity to leave behind something monumental that would endure for centuries to come. Upon accepting the role of chief architect, Michelangelo immediately set about reviewing the existing plans and simplifying the structure to achieve greater clarity and grandeur. He made several key changes to the design, including revising Bramante's original Greek cross layout into a more elongated Latin cross plan, which created a longer nave and more space for worshippers. This modification allowed the basilica to become more welcoming and functional, while maintaining its majestic form. One of the most significant contributions Michelangelo made to St. Peter's Basilica was his redesign of the dome, the most iconic and technically challenging element of the structure. Inspired by Brunelleschi's dome for the Florence Cathedral, Michelangelo envisioned a dome that would not only be structurally sound but would also embody the grandeur and spiritual symbolism of the Catholic faith. He designed a double-shell dome with an inner and outer layer that allowed for both stability and aesthetic harmony. The outer dome, which would rise majestically above the Vatican skyline, was meant to be a visual symbol of heaven, drawing the eyes of all who looked upon it toward the divine. For Michelangelo, the dome was more than just an architectural feature, it was a spiritual statement. It was a bridge between heaven and earth, a testament to the Renaissance belief that art and architecture could bring humanity closer to God. The design of the dome, with its soaring height and graceful curves, was meant to inspire awe and reverence, to lift the soul of every person who entered St. Peter's Basilica. Michelangelo believed that through architecture, he could create a sacred space where people could feel the presence of the divine, where they could be reminded of their place in the cosmos and their connection to something greater than themselves. The construction of the dome was a massive undertaking, one that Michelangelo oversaw with his characteristic intensity and attention to detail. Despite his age and failing health, Michelangelo was deeply involved in the project, frequently visiting the construction site and personally overseeing the work of the builders. He insisted on quality and precision at every stage, ensuring that his vision would be realized exactly as he intended. Yet, as with many of Michelangelo's grand projects, the completion of St. Peter's Basilica was fraught with challenges. Political conflicts within the Vatican, financial difficulties, and the sheer scale of the project made progress slow. Michelangelo, ever the perfectionist, struggled with the knowledge that he would likely not live to see the dome completed. Indeed, by the time of his death in 1564, the dome remained unfinished, though his designs and plans were left in place for his successors to follow. After Michelangelo's death, his plans for the dome were faithfully carried out by his successor, Giacomo della Porta, who completed the structure in 1590. The result was a dome that stands as one of the greatest achievements in the history of architecture. At over 136 meters in height, it remains one of the largest domes in the world, a symbol of the Catholic Church's spiritual and temporal power, and a lasting testament to Michelangelo's genius. But for Michelangelo, St. Peter's Basilica was more than just an architectural triumph. It was the culmination of a lifetime spent seeking to understand the relationship between art, faith, and the divine. Throughout his career, Michelangelo had grappled with the idea of creation, with the belief that through his hands he could touch the infinite. St. Peter's Basilica, with its grand scale and spiritual significance, allowed Michelangelo to merge these ideas into one final, extraordinary work. In the last years of his life, Michelangelo became increasingly devout. He often spoke of his art as a form of worship, a way of honoring God through the act of creation. He once said, "The true work of art is but a shadow of the divine perfection." For Michelangelo, art was not just a way to express beauty or skill, it was a way to reach beyond the physical world, to touch something eternal. In St. Peter's Basilica, Michelangelo saw the opportunity to create a sacred space that would endure for centuries, a place where the divine and the human could meet. Today, as visitors from all over the world stand beneath the dome of St. Peter's Basilica, gazing up at the vast expanse of stone and sky, they are reminded of the vision and faith of the man who made it possible. Michelangelo's work on St. Peter's is not just an architectural achievement, it is a testament to the power of art to transcend time, to elevate the human spirit, and to bring us closer to the divine. For Michelangelo, the Basilica represented the final chapter of a life dedicated to the pursuit of beauty, faith, and perfection. It was the physical embodiment of his belief that art could not only change the world but could also connect us to something far greater than ourselves. In the soaring arches and the grand dome of St. Peter's, Michelangelo left behind a legacy that continues to inspire and uplift all who walk through its doors. In his later years, as Michelangelo's hands grew slower but his mind more deeply attuned to the mysteries of life, he continued to reflect on the nature of art, creation, and the divine. One of his most poignant works from this period is a sculpture that many consider a deeply personal testament to his own spiritual journey, the Rondinini Pietà. This final version of the Pietà, which he worked on until the last days of his life, stands as a moving reflection of Michelangelo's evolving philosophy and his relationship with faith and mortality. The Rondinini Pietà was unlike any of Michelangelo's earlier works. While his first Pietà, completed in his youth, had showcased the technical mastery and beauty of a serene, youthful Virgin Mary holding the dead Christ, the Rondinini Pietà was starkly different. It was rough, unfinished, and deeply emotional, its forms almost abstract in comparison to the smooth perfection of his earlier sculptures. But this was no failure of skill or time, rather, it was a deliberate expression of Michelangelo's inner world in his final years. The Rondinini Pietà is raw, filled with the fragility of life and the inevitability of death. Michelangelo began working on this sculpture around 1552, and he would return to it intermittently over the next decade. Unlike his earlier Pietà, which depicted a calm and graceful Madonna, the Rondinini Pietà presents a more harrowing scene. The Virgin Mary, tall and gaunt, struggles to support the body of her son, whose emaciated form leans heavily against her. The figures seem almost fused together, as if in the process of dissolving into one another, their shapes merging into a single expression of grief and sacrifice. Christ's body is elongated and twisted, and Mary's face, barely defined, is marked by the profound weight of her sorrow. The sculpture remains incomplete, with rough patches of marble where Michelangelo had clearly begun to rework the figures. Yet, in this incompletion, there is a vulnerability that feels intentional, as though Michelangelo was no longer concerned with the technical perfection that had once defined his work. Instead, he was focused on the deeper meaning of the piece, the rawness of human suffering, the fragility of life, and the hope of transcendence through faith. The Rondinini Pietà reflects Michelangelo's deepening religious beliefs in his old age. As he grew older, Michelangelo became more introspective, more consumed by thoughts of death and the afterlife. His correspondence and poetry from this period are filled with reflections on his own mortality, on the limitations of the flesh, and on the eternal nature of the soul. This change in his thinking is mirrored in the stark contrast between the earlier, idealized works of his youth and the rough, almost skeletal forms of the Rondinini Pietà. In this final Pietà, Michelangelo is no longer concerned with portraying the beauty of the human body as he did in the famous David or the original Pietà. Instead, he turns his focus inward, seeking to capture the profound suffering and spiritual longing that he himself felt in his final years. The unfinished quality of the sculpture, with its rough surfaces and lack of fine detail, speaks to the unfinished nature of life itself, a life that, despite all its achievements and triumphs, is ultimately incomplete without the divine. What makes the Rondinini Pietà so powerful is its raw emotional intensity. The figures are almost ghost-like, barely holding together as they convey the weight of the moment. Mary, standing behind her son, seems barely able to support his lifeless body. Her elongated form speaks to both her physical and emotional burden as she carries the weight of Christ's death. But unlike the serene and youthful Mary of Michelangelo's earlier Pietà, this Mary is aged, worn down by suffering. Her expression, though not fully defined, suggests a deep spiritual exhaustion and acceptance of the tragedy that has unfolded before her. Christ, too, is depicted differently than in Michelangelo's previous works. His body, thin and angular, seems to dissolve into Mary's, as though the boundary between life and death is blurred. His face, though unfinished, expresses a quiet resignation, a surrender to the inevitability of his fate. Together, the two figures embody the sorrow of loss and the hope of redemption, the eternal themes that had preoccupied Michelangelo throughout his life. The Rondinini Pietà also represents Michelangelo's struggle with his own limitations as an artist and as a man facing death. The incompleteness of the sculpture, its roughness, its unfinished details, can be seen as a metaphor for Michelangelo's own journey toward death. Despite his immense talent and lifelong dedication to his craft, Michelangelo was acutely aware of his own mortality. He knew that no matter how much he achieved, he could never reach true perfection, and in the Rondinini Pietà, this awareness is laid bare. The figures, half-formed and fragile, reflect the vulnerability of human life, the fragility of the body, and the ultimate triumph of the soul. Michelangelo worked on the Rondinini Pietà until just days before his death in 1564, chipping away at the marble as though trying to unlock some final truth before the end. It is said that, as he approached his final moments, Michelangelo grew more devout, spending more time in prayer and contemplation. The Rondinini Pietà is the culmination of this spiritual journey, a work that is not about physical beauty or artistic perfection, but about the deep and abiding connection between human suffering and divine grace. Today, the Rondinini Pietà stands in stark contrast to Michelangelo's earlier works. It is not a sculpture of idealized forms or technical mastery, but a work of raw, emotional depth, a reflection of an artist who, in his final years, had come to terms with the limitations of life and the inevitability of death. Yet, in its unfinished state, the Rondinini Pietà also carries a sense of hope, of the possibility of transcendence through faith and love. For Michelangelo, the Rondinini Pietà was not just a sculpture, it was a testament to his lifelong search for meaning through art. It represents the final chapter of his creative journey, a work that, though incomplete, speaks to the eternal truths that had guided him throughout his life, the fragility of the human condition, the power of faith, and the possibility of redemption. In its rough, unfinished form, the Rondinini Pietà captures the essence of Michelangelo's philosophy in his later years, that art, like life, is always a work in progress, but through the struggle, we can glimpse the divine. Even today, visitors who stand before the Rondinini Pietà are moved by its raw power and emotional depth. It serves as a reminder that, even in his final days, Michelangelo was still searching, still striving, still seeking to understand the mysteries of life and death through his art. In this unfinished masterpiece, we find not just a reflection of Michelangelo's genius, but a glimpse into the soul of the artist himself, an artist who, until the very end, sought to connect with the divine through the act of creation. As Michelangelo's life neared its end, his profound relationship with faith, mortality, and the divine grew ever deeper, influencing his final creations and the way he viewed his legacy. Though physically weakened and increasingly introspective, his creative spirit remained strong. One of the most remarkable aspects of his later years was how he channeled these thoughts into his work, leaving behind a body of art that reflected both his spiritual convictions and his struggles with his own humanity. At the heart of this period was a series of drawings and sculptures that showed a man grappling with the weight of existence and the inevitable end of life. In this late stage of his life, Michelangelo became increasingly absorbed in religious contemplation. His correspondence and poetry from this time are filled with reflections on death, the afterlife, and the soul's relationship with God. Michelangelo, once a man of boundless energy and ambition, now found himself confronting the limits of human ability and the passage of time. He had spent decades creating works that celebrated the beauty of the human body and the divine spark within it, but now his attention turned to the soul's journey after death. This new focus was expressed in ways both subtle and explicit in his later works. One of Michelangelo's most significant late sculptures, the Rondinini Pietà, reflects this shift in his thinking. Unlike the earlier Pietà, which emphasized physical beauty and technical perfection, the Rondinini Pietà is rough, unfinished, and imbued with a sense of spiritual longing. The figures of Christ and the Virgin Mary are not depicted with the idealized forms of his earlier works, but rather with an almost ethereal fragility, as if they are caught between the physical world and the spiritual realm. Michelangelo's decision to leave the sculpture incomplete, its forms roughly hewn, its details barely emerging from the marble, speaks to his growing acceptance of imperfection and the transitory nature of life. The work embodies a deep sense of sorrow, not only for Christ's death, but for the suffering inherent in the human condition. This theme of unfinished beauty, of the incomplete work as a metaphor for life's own imperfection, became central to Michelangelo's later philosophy. He no longer sought the physical perfection that had characterized his earlier masterpieces like David or the Sistine Chapel. Instead, Michelangelo came to see art as a reflection of the divine mystery, something that could never be fully understood or captured by human hands. In a famous letter, he wrote, "Every block of stone has a statue inside it, and it is the task of the sculptor to discover it." But in his later years, Michelangelo seemed to acknowledge that not all statues could be fully revealed, that the divine within us might always remain partially obscured, just beyond our reach. As Michelangelo's health deteriorated, his thoughts turned increasingly to his own mortality. He had seen friends, patrons, and fellow artists pass away, and he knew his own time was coming. Yet, rather than succumbing to fear or despair, Michelangelo embraced these reflections with a kind of stoic acceptance. His later poetry is filled with meditations on death, often written in the form of sonnets that explore his desire for spiritual redemption and his readiness to meet God. In one particularly poignant poem, He writes of his regret over focusing so much on earthly beauty, now wishing instead to direct his energies toward the divine. Neither painting nor sculpture will be able any longer to calm my soul. Now turn to that divine love that opened his arms on the cross to receive us. In these lines, Michelangelo expresses a sense of release from the earthly concerns that had once driven him, the pursuit of fame, the desire to capture the beauty of the human form. Now, as he approached the end of his life, Michelangelo's thoughts turned to the next world, and his art reflected this spiritual transformation. The final years of Michelangelo's life also saw him take on more architectural projects, most notably his continued work on St. Peter's Basilica. Even as his health declined, Michelangelo remained committed to seeing the basilica's dome completed, overseeing the project with a dedication that seemed to transcend his physical limitations. For Michelangelo, architecture was not just about building structures, it was about creating sacred spaces that could elevate the human soul and bring people closer to God. His vision for St. Peter's was not only grand in scale but deeply spiritual, a culmination of his lifelong belief that art could connect the material world with the divine. Yet even with the grandeur of St. Peter's Basilica as his final major work, Michelangelo's later years were marked by an increasing humility. He recognized that despite his immense talents, he was ultimately subject to the same limitations as any other human being. His later works, with their unfinished forms and spiritual depth, reflect a man who had come to terms with the fact that no work of art could ever truly capture the essence of the divine. The act of creation, for Michelangelo, became less about achieving perfection and more about the process of striving toward it, knowing full well that the true beauty lay in the attempt, not the final product. In this sense, Michelangelo's later works can be seen as deeply personal reflections on his own life and legacy. The roughness, the incompleteness of these sculptures mirrors the human condition itself, our constant struggle to find meaning in a world that is always slipping through our fingers. And yet, there is also a profound sense of peace in these works, as if Michelangelo had finally come to accept the imperfection and mystery of life. Michelangelo died on February 18, 1564, at the age of 88. His death marked the end of an era, but his legacy continues to resonate through the centuries. The art he created in his later years, particularly the Rondinini Pietà and his final works on St. Peter's Basilica, reveal a man who, even in the face of death, remained committed to exploring the deepest questions of existence. Michelangelo's final works remind us that art is not merely about capturing beauty or technical mastery, it is about expressing the soul's journey, the search for meaning, and the desire to connect with something greater than ourselves. For Michelangelo, the journey toward the divine was always incomplete, always a work in progress. But through his art, he left behind a legacy that continues to inspire and uplift, reminding us that in the struggle for understanding and in the act of creation, we come closest to touching the divine. Michelangelo's journey through life was not just one of artistic mastery, but also one of deep philosophical and spiritual contemplation. As he aged, the fire of youth, which had driven him to pursue perfection in form and beauty, slowly transformed into a more introspective and meditative state. His final years reveal a man who grappled with profound questions of existence, faith, and the divine, questions that influenced his later works and left an indelible mark on his legacy. In these closing years, Michelangelo's thoughts were often preoccupied with the notion of the soul's journey, redemption, and the limitations of the earthly world. One of the key aspects of Michelangelo's late philosophy was his growing sense of humility and acceptance of imperfection. This shift is best represented in his unfinished sculptures, especially the Prisoners series, which he started earlier in his career but never completed. These figures, half emerged from the stone, stand as powerful metaphors for the human condition, beings trapped between the material and the spiritual, striving to break free from the limitations of the physical world. The rough, unpolished surfaces of these sculptures convey a sense of struggle, as if the figures are yearning for release, much like the human soul seeking liberation from the body. To Michelangelo, these incomplete works were not failures. Instead, they reflected his belief that no work of art could ever be truly finished or perfect, much like life itself. He once said, "Every block of stone has a statue inside it, and it is the task of the sculptor to discover it." In these later years, Michelangelo seemed to acknowledge that the process of discovering that statue, of revealing the divine within the earthly, was never complete. There would always be more to strive for, more to understand. This philosophy extended to his view of his own mortality. Michelangelo was acutely aware of his aging body, but he did not fear death as much as he contemplated it deeply. His poetry from this time is filled with reflections on the afterlife, on redemption, and on the idea that all of life is a preparation for the soul's journey beyond the earthly realm. In one of his most famous sonnets, Michelangelo wrote, "Now my desire and will, no longer bound, turn to that love which rules the heavens. Above the sky my soul seeks higher ground, its sacred aim no earthly passions move." Here, Michelangelo expresses the longing of the soul to be released from earthly attachments and to ascend to a higher, divine love. His poetry reveals the inner workings of a man who, after decades of striving for artistic perfection, had come to realize that true fulfillment lay not in the material world but in the spiritual one. As he grew older, Michelangelo's relationship with his art also changed. His earlier works, like the David or the Sistine Chapel ceiling, had been created with a sense of grandeur and mastery that sought to showcase the power and beauty of the human form. But in his later years, Michelangelo moved away from the pursuit of physical perfection. His work became more introspective, more focused on the soul's journey, and less concerned with outward beauty. He no longer sought to glorify the human body in the same way, but instead aimed to express the fragility and fleeting nature of life. The Rondinini Pietà, his final sculpture, is a prime example of this shift. The rough, unfinished forms of Mary and Christ seem to dissolve into one another, their physical bodies almost irrelevant in comparison to the deep emotional and spiritual connection between them. Unlike his earlier works, which focused on the perfect beauty of the body, the Rondinini Pietà captures the essence of human suffering, loss, and the hope for redemption. It reflects Michelangelo's belief that true beauty lies not in physical perfection but in the soul's journey toward God. Michelangelo's evolving philosophy also deeply influenced his work on St. Peter's Basilica. While he had spent much of his life perfecting the art of sculpture and painting, his architectural work on the basilica represented a culmination of his spiritual beliefs. For Michelangelo, St. Peter's was not just a building, it was a sacred space where heaven and earth could meet. The soaring dome, designed to lift the eyes of worshippers toward the heavens, was not merely a feat of engineering but a testament to Michelangelo's belief in the power of architecture to elevate the human spirit. He once said, "The greater danger for most of us lies not in setting our aim too high and falling short, but in setting our aim too low and achieving our mark." Michelangelo's aim with St. Peter's was nothing less than to create a space where people could feel the presence of the divine. Despite the grandeur of his work, Michelangelo's late writings and art reveal a man who had come to terms with the limitations of human existence. His letters and sonnets from this period reflect a growing humility and an acceptance of the fact that, no matter how great his achievements, he was still a mortal man subject to the same weaknesses and struggles as everyone else. This humility is evident in the unfinished quality of many of his later works, which seem to acknowledge the impossibility of achieving true perfection in this life. Michelangelo's relationship with faith also became more personal and profound in his later years. While he had always been a man of deep religious conviction, his later works express a kind of spiritual longing that goes beyond mere religious devotion. He was increasingly concerned with the soul's journey after death, with the idea of redemption, and with the hope that his own works might serve as a means of connecting others with the divine. In one of his letters, Michelangelo wrote, "Art is a shadow of the divine perfection." For him, art was not an end in itself, but a way of pointing towards something greater, toward the ultimate beauty and truth that could only be found in God. As Michelangelo faced the final years of his life, he became increasingly aware that his time was limited. Yet, even in the face of death, he continued to create, to reflect, and to strive toward understanding the mysteries of life and the divine. His final works, unfinished and rough, are some of his most profound, reflecting a man who had come to terms with the impermanence of life and the limitations of earthly achievement. Michelangelo's final years were a time of deep reflection and spiritual growth. His evolving philosophy, which embraced imperfection and the constant striving for something greater, continues to resonate with audiences today. His late works, filled with emotional depth and spiritual longing, serve as a reminder that art is not just about creating beauty but about exploring the human condition and our relationship with the divine. In the end, Michelangelo's life and work were a testament to the power of faith, the search for meaning, and the belief that, through art, we can glimpse the divine, even if only for a moment. As Michelangelo's life came to an end, his artistic contributions stood as a testament to his unparalleled genius and the transformative power of his work. His influence was not confined to the realms of sculpture, painting, and architecture. Rather, it extended far beyond his lifetime, leaving an enduring legacy that would shape the world of art, faith, and culture for centuries to come. Michelangelo's works became the gold standard for artistic excellence, and his innovative approach to form, emotion, and spirituality would inspire countless generations of artists, thinkers, and creators. Michelangelo's legacy is most profoundly felt in the way he redefined the possibilities of art. His sculptures, whether it was the breathtaking perfection of David or the tender, sorrowful grace of the Pietà, broke new ground in how the human form could be represented. He brought marble to life, imbuing cold stone with warmth, emotion, and dynamic energy. Through his mastery of anatomy and his deep understanding of human emotion, Michelangelo was able to capture not just the physical beauty of his subjects, but the essence of their souls. This ability to convey the divine in the human form would set Michelangelo apart as one of the greatest sculptors in history. But it was not just his sculptures that shaped his legacy. Michelangelo's work on the Sistine Chapel ceiling is often regarded as one of the most significant achievements in the history of art. The sheer scale of the project, combined with the complexity and emotional depth of the scenes, showcased Michelangelo's unparalleled ability to create immersive, narrative-driven works. His depiction of the creation of Adam, with its iconic portrayal of God reaching out to touch the hand of man, remains one of the most famous and reproduced images in Western art. This work did more than just decorate the Vatican. It set a new standard for the role of art in religious expression, demonstrating how art could become a vehicle for spiritual reflection and a means of connecting humanity to the divine. Michelangelo's contributions to architecture also left a lasting mark. His work on St. Peter's Basilica, particularly the design of its magnificent dome, not only transformed the skyline of Rome but also redefined the role of architecture in sacred spaces. Michelangelo understood that buildings could be more than just functional. They could inspire awe, lift the spirit, and create a sense of connection between heaven and earth. His dome, towering above the Vatican, remains one of the most recognizable architectural symbols of the Catholic Church and a testament to the genius of Renaissance design. Even beyond his completed works, Michelangelo's unfinished sculptures, such as the Prisoners series and the Rondinini Pietà, carry an important message about the nature of artistic creation and the human condition. These pieces, left incomplete as if frozen in time, serve as metaphors for the struggles and limitations of life itself. They remind us that art, like life, is always in progress, never fully finished, always striving towards something greater. In these unfinished works, Michelangelo revealed his understanding of the imperfect and the ephemeral, capturing a deeper sense of the human experience. Michelangelo's influence can also be felt in the way he elevated the role of the artist. Before Michelangelo, artists were often seen as craftsmen, tasked with fulfilling the demands of patrons. But Michelangelo helped to change that perception, demonstrating that artists could be intellectuals, philosophers, and visionaries. His artistic process, driven by deep personal reflection and spiritual contemplation, showcased the power of art to explore the mysteries of existence. Michelangelo believed that art was a form of divine expression, and through his work, he elevated the status of the artist to that of a creator, someone who could bring forth the divine through human hands. Throughout the centuries, Michelangelo's legacy has inspired some of the greatest artists in history, from his Renaissance contemporaries like Raphael and Leonardo da Vinci to later figures such as Bernini, Rodin, and even modern artists like Pablo Picasso. His impact on the development of Western art cannot be overstated. The ideals of beauty, balance, and emotional depth that Michelangelo embodied became foundational to the artistic movements that followed, from Baroque to Neoclassicism and beyond. Michelangelo's legacy is also felt in the enduring power of his spiritual themes. His deep engagement with religious subjects, whether in the Pietà, the Sistine Chapel frescoes, or his numerous depictions of biblical figures, helped to shape the way that Christianity was visually expressed during the Renaissance and beyond. His works provided believers with new ways of contemplating faith, suffering, and redemption, and they remain central to religious art today. Even outside the world of art, Michelangelo's influence continues to resonate. His dedication to his craft, his relentless pursuit of perfection, and his ability to transcend the limitations of his medium are qualities that have inspired countless individuals across different fields, from scientists to writers to philosophers. Michelangelo's life serves as a reminder that true greatness comes not just from talent, but from a deep commitment to one's vision, an unyielding perseverance in the face of challenges, and a willingness to push the boundaries of what is possible. In his final years, Michelangelo became increasingly introspective, focusing on themes of mortality, redemption, and the human soul. His later works, such as the Rondinini Pietà, reflect a man who had come to terms with the fragility of life and the inevitability of death. Yet, even in these moments of quiet contemplation, Michelangelo continued to create, to reflect, and to leave behind works that would endure long after he was gone. Today, Michelangelo's works are more than just masterpieces of art. They are living reminders of the power of creativity to transcend time, space, and culture. His legacy is one of endless inspiration, a testament to the idea that through art, we can touch the divine, connect with the human spirit, and leave behind something that speaks to the deepest parts of who we are. In the end, Michelangelo's enduring legacy is not just in the works he created, but in the way he showed the world what art could be, an exploration of the divine, a reflection of the human condition, and a journey toward understanding the mysteries of existence. His life and work remain a beacon of artistic and spiritual achievement, reminding us all that through creativity, we can reach for something greater than ourselves. As we draw to the end of Michelangelo's extraordinary story, we are left with not just the legacy of his masterpieces, but also the profound lessons that his life and work continue to teach us. Michelangelo was not only a master of his craft, but a seeker, a man who used art as a means to explore the deepest questions of existence, faith, and the human spirit. In every sculpture he carved, every fresco he painted, and every building he designed, Michelangelo left behind pieces of himself, forever intertwined with the divine aspirations of humanity. Michelangelo's life was one of relentless pursuit. He sought beauty, truth, and, above all, connection with something greater than himself. His art was never simply about creating objects of admiration, it was about striving for the eternal, for a moment where the divine and the human could meet in the marble or the paint. Through his hands, he carved not just figures, but emotions, hopes, and the very essence of the human condition. His ability to draw out the soul from stone is what makes his work timeless, what allows it to speak to us even centuries after his death. But Michelangelo's journey was not without struggle. In his later years, as his body aged and his strength waned, he turned increasingly inward, reflecting on his own mortality and the meaning of his life's work. His final creations, such as the Rondinini Pietà, show a man who had come to terms with the limitations of life, yet who still reached for the divine with every strike of his chisel. In this unfinished sculpture, we see not just the hands of an artist, but the soul of a man who understood that life is an ongoing work, never complete, always striving towards something greater. In the end, Michelangelo's art reminds us of the power of imperfection. His unfinished sculptures, rough and raw, speak of a deeper truth, that life itself is incomplete, and that in the struggle to create, to understand, and to express, we come closest to touching the divine. Michelangelo embraced this imperfection in his final years, realizing that the beauty of art and of life lies not in its completion, but in the ongoing journey. So, as you lie here, listening to the whispers of Michelangelo's story, let your mind drift to the images of his works, the graceful form of David, the tender sorrow of the Pietà, the awe-inspiring vastness of the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Imagine the weight of the marble in his hands, the slow, careful strokes of his chisel, and the vision that guided him throughout his life. Through Michelangelo, we see that art is not merely an act of creation, but an act of faith, a faith in beauty, in humanity, and in the possibility of touching something eternal. And now, as the night deepens and you settle into rest, let Michelangelo's journey remind you that we, too, are all works in progress. We are each carving our own path, unfinished but full of potential, striving toward the light. So, let go of the day's burdens and allow the quiet of the night to fill your mind with peace, knowing that, like Michelangelo's creations, you are on a journey that continues to unfold, beautiful in its imperfection. Thank you for joining Whisper Tales. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with inspiration and light. Good night.